Bette Davis. David, take a lesson. Don't be like the studio idiots. Always let a star make her own decisions.
I worked on a show called Night of the Iguana. I was the assistant press agent, and my boss had a long relationship with Betty, so I assumed I would never have anything to do with her. So I would give him little couplets I'd leave on his desk. I only remember one. It said, will it be, I'll never see my favorite actress, Bette D? Because when I was a kid, I thought the height of Hollywood acting was Bette Davis and Spencer Tracy. I had good taste as a kid. So I was working on a show with Bette Davis. I at least should meet her. So Ben said, I'll bring you around after a Wednesday, the first Wednesday matinee. The show was trying out in Chicago. So we go into her dressing room, and you would have sworn that it was Margot Channing from All About Eve. She had a terry, that's a movie, by the way. She had a terry cloth robe on, a schmata around her head, the cold cream on her face, smoking cigarettes like Bette Davis. And she sits me down, and within 30 seconds she had me laughing. And then I said something, and she laughed. And then we started talking about the theater, and then about movies, and then about politics, and we found out that we both shared a passion for the new Kennedy administration that was there. And she turned to my boss, Ben, and said, Ben, you're free. The boy can take care of me. And Ben was so relieved that he didn't have to deal with Betty, and that I was assigned to cover all of her interviews. Wow. And I'll just tell you the first one, because I was still terrified of her, but somebody said to me, oh, Bette Davis, she'll chew you up and spit you out like bad meat. She's a tough lady, which I never found to be true. What I found was that divas like that want professionals, and if you do your job, they're relieved that the little pressure is off. Anyway, the first time we went to the Martha Dean, which was WOR radio, which in those days meant something. So Betty and I go in, and we're sitting at a long table like the one film is at now. Martha Dean's there, and Betty and I are sitting there. In those days, you could smoke. Betty takes out a cigarette, takes a kitchen match and like a flamethrower. And I'm laughing. What she did publicly, which was very different when we were alone, is she played Bette Davis. And I got it, and she loved the fact that I was getting it. We had a nice rapport. And I laughed a lot at the things that people were intimidated by her, and she made me comfortable. Anyway, Martha Dean, this is what I remember, this is what you want to hear. Martha Dean said, last year I was in Hollywood and I was interviewing people at the studio, and I tried to get an interview with you, and the studio wouldn't allow me, but they did let me talk to Gary Merrill, who Betty had married during All About Eve, and had since divorced. And Martha said, and what is Mr. Merrill doing now? And Betty went, drinking. At which point I let out a roar, and Betty said, dear, you better wait in the sponsor's booth if you can't control yourself. And then afterwards, when we were leaving WOR, we got on the elevator, and there were 3 businessmen, and immediately they recognized this internationally recognizable diva who was buried up to here in Maine. And so she had a new audience. She said, Dave, always let a star make her own decision, referring back to the studio people. And they all looked at this little whippersnapper, and what did he do to her? But when we got into the car, she said to me, here are the rules. I will do an interview if they don't insult my intelligence, if it sells tickets for the show, and if it works around my schedule. Just come to me with that. And I did for a few weeks, and then she said to me one day, David, you don't have to bother me, you decide. And what I realized what she was telling me is that she saw me as a peer, as a professional, and that she trusted my judgment. And I understood when I worked with people like Eartha Kitt, who I was told was difficult, and Peggy Lee, there was an aura of difficulty, I found no I found no problems. Can I tell the Eartha Kitt story?
Sure.
The first thing is, Eartha had a terrible time with the press. You may remember this, some of you may remember. In the 60s, she was at the White House, and she had questioned all being in the war. And she didn't work in television and movies for 10 years. She had made most of her money in Europe. She was blackballed because she had challenged the White House, the Johnson administration. So she was pretty media shy when I went to work with her. She was at the ballroom. And one day we were at NPR over on the east side, and we were walking down the street afterwards. And when you walk down the street with Eartha Kitt, everybody knew her. She had one of those faces that everyone recognized, from Catwoman, believe it or not, from Batman. So she said to me, "Where are you going now? Are you getting a bite to eat?" And I said, "Well, at lunch I go and play basketball at the Y." And she said, "I have my togs. Do you think that they would let me come there and work out?" And I said, "Are you kidding? They'll go out of their mind if I bring you there." So at the 23rd Street Y, the basketball court was down there, and there was a track that went over it. And I went upstairs, and I wanted to play basketball. And Eartha was on the track, and everyone was saying, "There's Eartha Kitt, there's Eartha Kitt." And as she went around, she said, "David, hi." Suddenly, I had a new prestige at the Y.